Rex Heuermann, the man that is being accused of being the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach murderer, charged with two more murders. One, Jessica Taylor, whose partial remains were found near Gilgo Beach in 2011 and then linked to other partial remains that were found 8 years earlier in a remote wooded area in Marionville, but a 45-minute drive east. And another murder he has been charged with. Sandra Costella, 28-year-old New York woman whose remains were found in 1993 in the Hamptons. Her long unsolved murder has not previously been associated with the Gilgo Beach investigation until today. Joining me to discuss, Bob Motta, defense attorney, host of the podcast Defense Diaries. I know a lot of us were expecting at least one more charge today, but two? Surprised?
No,
No?
I'm not. I'm not. I think sadly, I think there's going to be more.
Yeah.
I mean, to like for us on the outside looking in, they've just added 2 decades to his activity
Mm-hmm.
in terms of times of being active. Because now we're going back to '93. I fear that there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah.
The question will be, can they piece it together? But the one thing that we know, based on what happened today, is that they're trying, and they are actively trying to put victims on this guy because they know he was a monster.
Yeah.
And this is not spurious evidence they're coming up with. The DNA stuff with his hairs being up. He's the guy.
Yeah.
Like I'm the always the biggest innocent until proven guilty. But in terms of which, and I always say, all right, look, we got to wait until trial, which is always true. But in terms of the strength of those bail applications and the evidence in which they've found in order to link him to these crimes is exceptionally powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Exceptionally powerful. I can't think of this is predates like touch DNA. They're finding too many of Asa and Heuermann's hairs on these victims for it to be all coincidence. So, like what they're doing is every single and they're working their way backward with this investigation. Now, like the one common factor in all of them is that the family is out of town when he's committing these crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So they are figuring out exactly every date that either he's traveling and or Asa and the kid that's gone, they're gone, and the house is empty. They're then going into NamUs. They're saying, all right, like who died,
Mm-hmm.
in and around this area, who went missing in and around this area on those dates. And same with anywhere he traveled. They're putting, they're connecting those dots. They're going back to those agencies and saying, did you get any was there any biological left? Do
Yeah.
you have any DNA, probable DNA? And then they're going to private labs and they're having them develop profiles and they're coming up with home runs, man, like 99.9, blah, 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 blah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
And this one is connecting us to a body that was not on Gilgo Beach. This is in the
correct.
Hamptons we're talking about here. So if we were thinking, oh, well, he only dumps the bodies over here, this is showing it not so much. Like he probably has graves all over the place of wherever was convenient to dump the body at that time. 1993 in the hat. I mean, just think back. It's like The Bodyguard was a new movie at the time. I
Dude,
mean, I was a kid. We were
dude,
both
I'm
kids.
like
Yeah.
4 years out of graduating high
Yeah.
school,
I mean, yeah,
you know?
I remember taking a summer vacation and being a kid. And gosh, how far so we have something this far back. How do you think they connected the dots to this one with that much time that's been spent? Is it DNA? Is it something else? Could it have been some of Asa's talking to the documentarians? I mean, it's just pure speculation, but how do you think they connected something that far back?
I have a feeling that they found a document. Like Tierney, I was watching the presser today and he was talking about a document that they found that they put it together, and then so there's this document that they've had. Now, I don't know if they found that in that lockbox.
Hmm.
I don't know if they found that when they were going through his massive amount of hard drives and like, I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of data that they collected from his devices is mind blowing and terrifying. I mean, I think that they said during the presser today that there were 43 SD cards. I'm hoping very much that that is not significant of the number of victims, but
But what's on those SD cards, and why do you have so many SD cards?
that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
man. And for a creep who, clearly kept souvenirs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like obviously we're speculating, but
Mhm.
your mind can go to some dark places, and this guy was clearly a monster.
Yeah.
So I mean, I fear that he was active for a long, long time. I mean, Gacy, they put 33 on him, and he was active for 6 years.
Mhm.
This guy who's 60 years old, and in 93, he's a relatively young man, and he's got the taste at that point in time.
We're talking almost like 3 decades here.
3 decades,
Yeah.
man, of like a dude that's warped. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's a scary thought. It's terrifying, actually, like just how much, I mean, it's like a never ending nightmare with this guy. And they're like, I don't know that they'll ever shut this investigation down. I mean, how could they?
Well,
You know,
and
I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna keep going on and on. I mean, how are they going to get to a court date on this if the investigation is basically endless? Do we just start charging him with this batch and then we'll have another batch later on, but let's get it rolling? Or at some point, I mean, do you think this will actually ever even make it to court as a trial, or is this just gonna get so overwhelming that he's gonna have to plead at some point?
it depends. It depends on if there's a mental defect defense.
Mhm.
I mean, when you have, like with Gacy, you had 27 bodies buried in his crawl space, right? So
Mhm.
pretty powerful circumstantial evidence, right? Like you feel, yeah, there's the presumption of innocence, but you feel pretty secure that unless he's hosting, an off-book funeral parlor or graveyard, telling, oh, if you're a murderer, you could bury. I mean, so, I I mean, with this guy, it's kind of the same thing wherein you're going to, I don't know, man. I don't know if they'll, like, they can't reel back the investigation. So
No.
I mean, today what happened was what they call a superseding indictment. So they added it to the bunch,
Mhm.
right? So this is added to. Is that going to buy his attorney time? But again, it's like if they're not going to go with the mental defect defense, and with the evidence that they put together being so powerful thus far, it seems idiotic for him to go to trial, but these guys seem to like to go to trial,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
like they I don't know if it's because of that whole narcissistic, they relish the limelight,
Mhm.
but they just seem to go to trial because they think that it builds onto their legend, their sick, warped legend.
Yeah.
Um, but and it's always an interesting thing because theoretically, the defense could file a motion to sever all of the charges and force multiple trials because
True.
none of these crimes took place at the same time. I mean, it was the thing with Gacy. You had 6 years of crimes. All of these young men were killed on different dates and different years at different locations. So you don't have the typical earmarks of things that allow you to, try multiple counts that may have taken place, like it may be a different location, but were connected, at the same time. I mean, there's an argument that they should be severed, but no one wants, the state certainly doesn't want to have to try each of these individually, and I don't necessarily know the defense does either. But from the defense side of it, you have to look at it as, okay, they've got powerful evidence on cases A, B, and C, not so much on D and E. And what they're going to do is they're going to use that powerful evidence on the cases that they have the powerful evidence on to bootstrap it to the weaker cases if they try it all at the same time. That's
Yeah.
that's always the argument we make in terms of severance. So I have a feeling that they're going to reset a trial date whatever date set's going to get kicked again because obviously there's going to be a ton of new information coming in. And I mean, it could like he's incarcerated.
Yeah.
You know, what I mean, like the difference between him being in prison and while they still do have the death penalty in New York, they haven't used it in forever.
Mhm.
Maybe they dusted off for this guy. I don't know. But in terms of
If he's
just this
crossing state lines,
investigation,
though, on this, doesn't that put him more into federal territory as well? If he's crossing state lines on some of this,
it certainly could. I
yeah.
mean, like if it I mean, yeah, serial killers could always be as long as they're crossing state lines, which we know he has. If this thing hits in Nevada, which we're still waiting on the DNA from that,
Hmm.
his trip out to Nevada, um, I mean, the feds could step in, but they're not going to step on Tierney's toes.
Sure.
I mean, they know they're doing a pretty good job here, and if the
Yeah.
state's taking care of it,
Hmm.
the feds don't need to step in and try it.
Sure.
So but yeah, in theory, with that state line thing definitely gives the feds jurisdiction.
It's starting to feel reminiscent of BTK in a way of like, okay, we're finding more and more out. It's going to be interesting to see how Heuermann plays it if he ever does fess up to any of this, or if he does finally say, "Yeah, I did this," but you don't know about the other ones. And then years and years later, I mean, it's going on right now. There's a lot of hinting at activity that there may be some others that were unsolved that are about to get some limelight here.
Yep.
I feel like this is going to be the same sort of thing where eventually he will get to trial, will be found guilty, but they're going to keep unearthing more and more and more. And what are we going to see happen at that point?
Well, and I mean, the question is does this guy have a shred of humanity? Like once he's convicted and never seeing the light of day again, I mean, is he capable of having the humanity if he has committed a ton more of these things to give the families that tiny bit of closure,
Yeah.
you know, that they deserve at the very least? Probably not. These guys just have a tendency to not, for whatever reason, I don't know. I think that they're just incapable of it.
Hmm.
That part of their psyche does not exist that separates them from normal people.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, like,
I wonder how much of a cat and mouse game this guy is going to want to play, the same way that Dennis Rader still is to this day. I just saw some of his letters, just brand new letters, just the other day, off the record that from people that I know that are investigating this, and he's still putting out
oh
little
yeah,
clues and shit,
oh yeah,
and no humanity there, but just enjoys
zero,
the spectacle of what they are and their, their legacy. Like this is
I
their
know,
legacy, and
right?
they
It's
like
there's
this.
their warped sense of legacy, and then
Yeah.
like in their minds, it's like, and it's strange because a majority of them are just like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It seems to be a running theme with these guys, um, and it's which always leads me down that path of how much because the challenge, like my dad when he tried the Gacy case, that was an insanity
Hmm.
defense, and you can't objectively look at a dude who's got a graveyard under his house and hosts huge parties with politicians and lawyers and hoity-toities from the area over the course of years, and for all intents and purposes is a completely normal guy, much more ingrained into society than even Raider, or
Yeah.
the guys that they've talked about that were kind of like under the radar but out
Yeah.
there. Like Gacy was like up in people's business.
Mhm.
Like he was the scariest of them to me just because of how he was. And you have to know that he's broken, like no
Yeah.
normal person, but they can't quantify it.
But is that
There is
insane, or is that
no,
just really, calculated? And this is what he wants to do. This is what he's into. Is
or he's
that insane?
compelled.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's the thing. Like we know jack shit about the human mind, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
No.
Like we go like we just don't. Like we just don't have that capability scientifically to understand it. I mean, I'm telling you, Tony, I've been practicing law for 20 years, and it's just now that prosecutors' offices are acknowledging that mental health and mental illness is a primary cause
Yeah.
of why most people commit crimes. Now, obviously, most of the time it's not serial murdering, but like it's addiction and mental
Yeah.
illness are always somewhere at play when
Hmm.
you're talking about normal folks that go unhinged and, do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And with these guys, something's broken.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? And whether it's a nature or nurture question or a combination of both, whether they're born broken or whether they're born like partially broken and then are made totally broken
Hmm.
by like an abusive parent, or I mean, it's just, I think there's things that could be learned from
Yeah.
it, like, but people want justice,
Hmm.
and the form of justice that people want is not these guys going to mental health facilities and trying to be fixed.
Hmm.
It's like it's no one's idea of justice, and it's so hard to convince a jury that it is,
Well, I
It's
mean, and
like
then you get to the, I mean, like, can you fix them? I'd love to get more to the front end of it and go, how do we recognize this sort of behavior
right,
before they get there? How do we recognize it in kids? How do we do that? And let's look at all of these as a case study, and hopefully our kids or grandkids or great grandkids have a better place to live in where these sort of things can be picked out earlier and
exactly.
healed or remediated so it doesn't turn into this insanity.
Right, because if you wanna be, like, nuts and bolt about it, like, because of the difficulty in the modern era, because of technology and the fact that we're all on the grid all the time, like, the concept of serial killers as we've known them for the past 40 years is going to vanish.
Hmm.
It's going to be too difficult. So what the new era serial killer is are the spree killers.
Hmm.
Those are the same kids that would probably more likely than not grow up to be serial killers, and instead what they're doing is shooting up groups of people all at one time.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like that same broken mind is still there,
Hmm.
but just the ability to be able to actually do the deeds has become so much more difficult. Like my producer and I, Darren, always had this debate when we were doing our Gacy season. We're like, if Gacy's active now, like honestly, like how many do you think that he's getting away with? And these were like, there was some misconception that this was all wayward kids that were out street walking, and it wasn't. It was kids that worked for him. It was kids that had good families. One of the kids, father was a lieutenant in the Chicago Police Department. These were kids that were loved and
Yeah.
wanted and like were known to be missing, and it's like now we know what happens. A kid goes missing, we're all getting Amber Alerts on our phone. Like it is just not the same
Hmm.
era
Yeah.
in terms of the ability for these guys to be able to do that. And so then it's like, okay, well, maybe they're going to focus on sex workers because nobody cares about them. Well, I don't believe that either.
Hmm.
I think that sex workers are human beings trying to struggle through and make a living, and they've got plenty of people that love them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Point being, it's just really, really hard to get away with it now.
Yeah.
And like I just think that now what we see are these school shootings where these kids are broken.
Yeah.
They're committing these. I mean, you see Ethan Crumbly, like how that kid, you look at his journal, that kid's broken. I
Yeah.
don't give a shit what anybody says.
Oh,
That kid
completely.
is mentally broken,
Hmm.
So
Yeah. It's a matter of getting in and getting ahead of that. How we do it,
yeah.
and
How do we
hopefully
do it?
that's the
It's a
question.
million dollar question,
Yep.
man.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to follow us wherever you download podcasts, and especially Apple Podcasts, where you can get advanced episode and premium content on our premium channel right there. Also, be sure to follow us on social media so you don't miss any breaking updates on the stories that matter to you most. We're on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski, and you'll find us right there. Again, thanks for watching.